So it is 2014 and I've just been rushed off to the hospital by paramedics. I'm in the x-ray room and I'm holding on to an x-ray machine when it's 12 o'clock at night and I just turned 40 years old. This is not where I imagined I'd be for my 40th birthday. A year later, I recorded this video. My journey, I don't know where I'm going to be going after sort of mid-September, and how I'm going to earn an income. Two large questions. This is just the start. It's end of August now, and 2015. Who knows how long I'll be traveling for? Maybe a year, maybe 2 years, maybe for the rest of my life. Don't know. And what I'm going to discover. So I'm going to record things as I go along, but this is one of the first videos as part of the start of this journey. Maybe this is the video of uncertainty, of this unknown, that I'll know the answers to this in a couple of months' time, and I'll be so glad I made all the decisions I made. I'll keep you updated. Bye. 2 years before this video, I had been divorced for a number of years, and I met a girl that I had fallen in love with, and I had spent maybe about 8 months with her before deciding to introduce my sons to her. And those first couple of months were incredible. We would spend time watching movies together. We would cook. The one day we went to the harbor and to go and do some crabbing. And I remember the day where my sons were sitting along the edge of the harbor. We had these buckets filled with water and some crabs, and we would fish for the crabs, and my sons would be so delighted every time they would catch a crab, and they would show the two of us. And I just thought my life couldn't get any better. Things changed dramatically the day that my girlfriend was going to be moving into my apartment. I told my sons about this, and it was, I think, very hard for them to accept that potentially they might be her stepmother. And we're not prepared to handle events like this in your life. There's no education that I had leading up to this point. There's no preparation for it. Things started spiraling horribly out of control, where my kids weren't happy to see me when my girlfriend was going to be there. And it just got worse and worse and worse and worse. And I just didn't know how to deal with the situation. The day that my girlfriend moved into my apartment would be the last day that I would end up spending time with them for a period of over 3 years. And this just destroyed me. I didn't know what to do. Days would go by, then weeks would go by. I remember meeting up with a good friend of mine, which has been a mentor in my life, and I asked him to meet me up for a cup of coffee. It was a Friday evening, and I was telling him about the situation where my kids just were so angry with me because of the decisions that I had made. And I said to him, I just don't know what to do. So he asked me, Gary, what is the gift in this situation? And I was confused. I was like, what do you mean, what is the gift? How can this be a gift? And then I realized, what am I going to do with this time that I have available where I'd normally be seeing my sons? What am I going to do with that time, as opposed to just worrying about it and allowing my life to spiral out of control? The very next day, I started running, and I was so horribly unfit that I couldn't even run for 5 minutes before I'd have to stop, and there would be, out of just sheer exhaustion, there'd be acid flowing through my throat, and I would have to stop so many times just to regain my breath and start running again. But every day I continued, and I'd run and I'd run. And during this process, I also started changing
my diet, what I was eating, removing more and more sugar out of my life, alcohol, doing more and more difficult things, just slowly, day by day, changing my life, making use of that gift that I had. A little bit later, I decided to do something a little bit more difficult, where I was going to go and sleep the night in a forest alone in something called a bivvy, which is basically a waterproof sleeping bag, just by myself in this forest. And I remember parking my car, got my backpack out, my sleeping bag, and I checked my phone one last time before turning it off. And I received this email from my son's school, and that would be such a life-changing thing to receive. Instead of it saying, this was my oldest son, instead of it saying his first name and my last name, he had changed his name to my ex-wife's name. And that news and seeing that was like a knife being stuck into me. I realized that it might not be a few more months till I would see my sons again, that it potentially could be decades. I went into that forest, and it was a very difficult night. But the next day, I realized I had to change the course of my life. That I had to do things even more differently than what I had in terms of this running and the exercise. I had to do a dramatic change. I ended up volunteering my time at an event where I met a second mentor in my life, and I had shared part of my story with him and the events that led up to that day. And I asked him, what is one bit of advice that you could give me? And he turned to me and he said, Gary, you need to trust. And that single bit of advice has stuck with me to this day. Within 2 weeks of this event, I ended up selling and giving away everything that I owned, down to a backpack of 55 items. I ended up completely rebooting my life. I moved out of the apartment that I was living in, gave up the car that I was driving, and moved away from the city that I was living in, which was close to where my sons were living. I moved to London, and during this time I continued with difficult challenges and some life experiences that came my way. One of those challenges was stand-up comedy. So much more difficult than what it seems.
Got some food out of my basket, out of my bag. Why would I have a basket?
I was given also an opportunity of volunteering at a refugee camp in Calais. And in this time, I was so humbled by the conversations with some of the refugees and the volunteers that lived there. Fast forward 9 months later, and I ended up moving to South America. And during this time, I was figuring out more and more every day a new way of living my life, living this new life. I ended up learning to dance, salsa dance, something that was so terrible at first, but over time I got a little bit better. I continued to transform my body by working out virtually every single morning and sometimes evenings. Two and a half years though now had passed since spending time with my kids, and through all of these things that I had done, all these difficult challenges, I had developed enough courage to go and meet up with my ex-wife. This felt like I was going into a gladiator arena. Where my ex-wife lived and my sons, there were 60 family members, and I imagine when I came to meet up with her that these family members were going to be waiting for me with pitchforks, angry at me. And it was the shame of the few weeks turning into few months into years that had gone by had kept me away from this very moment. It went better than I expected. It was about 4 hours of having coffee with my ex, and initially it was very difficult, the conversation. She was angry with me, understandably. She hadn't known what had happened to me, where I was even living. I had had no contact with her for that time. During this time, I was healing and recovering from the events that took place. She had shared with me how my boys had been and the struggles that they had been through, and eventually started showing some photos of my sons, and it was so beautiful seeing how much they had grown in that time, though so hard to have not been there. I had asked whether I could see my kids in while I was there in that trip. Unfortunately, they weren't ready to see me yet. 6 months went by, and I remember it was a Thursday morning, and I arrived at my son's house, and my oldest son was standing at the door waiting for me. He ended up just walking towards me, and we ended up hugging each other. And I don't know how long we hugged each other for, but it was, we missed each other so much. I ended up then seeing my younger son and giving him a big hug. And from that day, I've continued to see and speak to my kids. I speak to them every second or third day. And it's beautiful, the time that I get to spend with them. On the trips that I've gone back to see them, I've gone to the river with my son and spent time with him, and time with my oldest son, working on his car and having fun with him and sharing stories and learning from each other. I ended up taking them on a trip to Berlin, which is where my brother was living, and I ended up bringing my ex-wife with as well on that trip. It was beautiful because my kids got to see my brother again and their cousins. During that trip, I was on a Skype call to my parents, and my kids got to speak to my parents, their grandparents again. It was such a beautiful moment, the whole family starting to reconnect again to my kids through the events that had taken place. There are four main pillars in a person's life. When you're married and you've got your kids, the first pillar is your relationship pillar. When you go through a divorce like this and a separation and events like this that took place, that relationship pillar just completely crumbles, it disintegrates. Fairly shortly after, in my case, my health failed, just through the uncertainty of where your life was going to go, whether you would reconnect and reunite with your kids again. Your mind starts breaking down, and fortunately for the mentors in my life, they kept that together and kept me and guided me onto the pathway that I am now. And your income is a fourth pillar that completely crumbled during this time period. When I was in that hospital, I was completely broke. The business that I was running failed during that time, because all my focus and worry was on my kids and trying to reunite with them, trying to figure out a way on how to bring them back into my life. I feel so grateful for the mentors that I met in my life during this journey to have helped me rebuild these pillars within my life, just starting with my mind, where those simple questions that those mentors asked me and the guidance that they gave me helped give me the strength and the courage to take the actions that I have within my life. Continue along this path, and the other mentors that I met for transforming my body and my health and my income, and then my relationship and reuniting with my kids was just such a beautiful, beautiful thing. I would love to hear from you if you're a father and you've lost contact with your kids, whether it is for a couple of months or even if it is a few years. And for those fathers who have been fortunate enough to have reunited with your kids, please send me a message in the form below. Your stories will help me guide future fathers that are still on this journey in their lives.